Video games as you know them are dying. Alright, that might have been a little bit melodramatic, but I do think that the face of the video game industry is going to look very, very different over the course of the next few years. You might think that I'm talking about various controversies about video games the past few years, like accessibility issues with difficult games like Cuphead or any, various Gamergate-related topic, but really, I think, compared to the economic issues, that is very insignificant in terms of how video games are going to be affected. What really got me thinking about this was the controversy over the loot boxes and the money spent on Star Wars Battlefront 2. The Star Wars Battlefront 2 controversy came to a head yesterday when EA responded to the controversy and received what is currently the most downvoted Reddit comment in history. I think as of the time of making this video, it's somewhere like negative 670,000 points. Completely fucking insane. For those of you who aren't familiar with the controversy, basically Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a Star Wars game that allows you at some point to unlock heroes such as Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Chewie, etc. You know, and unlockables have always been a big part of games like this. What hasn't been a part of games like this over the years is that you can pay money in order to come closer to unlocking these characters with loot boxes. What loot boxes are is essentially a form of gambling in which you pay them a certain amount of money to get random items, including some of the in-game currency it takes to unlock characters such as Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, etc. It's a model that's very similar to free-to-play cell phone games, and while you might think, well, if you don't want to pay the money, then just play the game and unlock it, right? Normally, you would unlock these kinds of things through discovering something, achieving something in the game, or at least, you know, earning something in a reasonable amount of time. But in order to unlock any of these characters who obviously any Star Wars fan is going to want to be able to play as, you have to put in, like, I think it's something at an estimated 40 hours per unlockable character of just a brainless grind. 40 hours, like, there are very few games that people will play for that long, just for the normal gameplay, let alone just grinding away over and over and over to get the chance to play as one of the characters that really you should be able to play as relatively easily. You know, I mean, it doesn't get more fundamental to a Star Wars game than Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, right? So it's clear that they put this very high barrier to getting these characters in order to encourage you to spend real-life money inside of the game to unlock them faster. In response to finding out that basic characters like Darth Vader would be tucked away impossibly unless you spend an additional large amounts of money to get them, people have been canceling their pre-orders of their game en masse. And in response to this, EA's community manager took to Reddit to try and explain why they did what they did, and he made it so much worse. The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. As for cost, we selected initial values based upon data from the open beta and other adjustments made to milestone awards before launch. Among other things, we're looking at average per player credit earn rates on a daily basis, and we'll be making constant adjustments to ensure that players have challenges that are compelling, rewarding, and of course attainable via gameplay. We appreciate the candid feedback and the passion the community has put forth around the current topics here on Reddit, our forums, and across numerous social media outlets. Our team will continue to make changes and monitor community feedback and update everyone as soon as often as we can. And at the time of me making this video, the comment now sits at negative 681,000 votes. When you look at this comment, EA was doubling down on their position and saying, no, if you want Darth Vader, you'd better cough up that $300 or play for a rewarding 40 hours. And the first response to this encapsulates it so perfectly. DP Snack says, I wonder if Burger King wants to sell me a sense of pride and accomplishment by making me work 10 hours for my fucking fries. Like, exactly, that is the perfect way of illustrating for anyone who really doesn't get what the problem is here. You already bought your meal, you bought your game. Why is it then that you just can't have what you bought within a reasonable amount of time? It's also worth noting that EA's community manager went on Twitter and then called the critics armchair developers, as if you can't have an opinion of something without being in the creative process. It's as if you went to a restaurant, didn't get your whole order, and then they called you an armchair chef. But then finally EA decided to walk it back a bit in response, and they're still getting tons of cancellations, but I'm sure now once people realize what's happened, they're going to turn around and buy the game now. But they reduced the cost of some characters like Darth Vader by 75% or so. So now it is possible to get these characters with a reasonable amount of grind without spending a ton of money. So people are like, yeah, we did it, guys. We did it, Reddit. We won. We won. But honestly, it's the kind of thing where it's like, alright, you might have won this battle, but I think it's very clear to see where the tide is going in video games. The original title of this video was going to be Don't Buy Star Wars Battlefront 2, but really, I got to think about it, and it really doesn't fucking matter if you buy the game or not. I don't think it matters because the tide is simply turning towards this kind of model, I think, at least for AAA games. You have to think that even with the 670,000 or more people who downvoted this comment, made it the most hated comment of all time on Reddit, and are canceling their pre-orders, and are probably never going to buy the game, even if every single one of those people doesn't buy the game, this game's gonna sell a shitload of copies. Like every demographic of people more or less plays video games now, and every demographic of people likes Star Wars. Those 670,000 people, although it's a large number, it still represents a very small fraction of the market for Star Wars Battlefront 2. I like Star Wars, my parents' generation likes Star Wars, my grandparents' generation likes Star Wars, and the new kids coming up, they like Star Wars. And even with the reduced price of getting these characters, Christmas morning comes along and little Jimmy realizes, hey, I got Star Wars Battlefront 2, but I don't have Darth Vader, I don't have Luke Skywalker, I want them now, it's fucking Christmas. So of course, the parents want him to enjoy his Christmas present the way that they thought he would enjoy his Christmas present, so they're gonna spend the money so he gets Darth Vader. Even at that reduced cost, it still makes an impact. It's still a game that's making much more money than a retail game makes based off of microtransactions. And furthermore now, the young kids who are playing games with these kinds of microtransaction models, they don't know a time beyond that where, you could just work for unlockables through normal means and, not have to pay money, not be able to pay money to advance yourself. So to these kids, this is just going to be a normal thing. Like, they're not going to think about how things ought to be, how things should be, how things were. It's not a part of their mental history. And frankly, games are costing so much more to make now that something has to be done at some point. As technology gets more advanced and people are demanding more and more content in these games, these sorts of AAA titles are just going to cost more and more money to make, while game prices remain stagnant. In fact, they've kind of gone down since I was a kid. I remember waiting outside of Electronics Boutique the day Street Fighter 2 Turbo came out for SNES. I was kind of blown away by how expensive the game was. It was $90 in the 90s for that cartridge, which $90 then was expensive for a game, but then you figure adjusting for inflation, it's even more than that. A person today would probably scoff at the idea of paying $90 for a game, and yet now they cost so much more to produce. Something's gotta give at some point. I saw a video recently that got me thinking about the financial realities of today's video game market. It was by Avid Expert, and it was about whether or not survival horror games, the horror video game genre, is it dying? And at first I thought that was a ridiculous concept. I thought of all the really good horror games that have been coming out the past few years, and I thought, if anything, we are living in a new revival of the horror genre. Resident Evil 7 was such a good game. I'm a huge fan of the Resident Evil video game series, as indicated by my fucking Resident Evil full sleeve I got going on here. But I felt like I haven't really enjoyed a Resident Evil game since Resident Evil 4, and then 7 came out and I loved it. It was a really good return to the horror genre while making it feel modern. However, and I'd even heard this before his video came out, that Resident Evil 7 financially fell way short of expectations. But what's happening, especially in the horror genre, is that instead of buying the games, people are simply watching Let's Plays and then never playing them themselves. This obviously takes a big chunk out of the game developer's bottom line. And while a game like Resident Evil 7 or Outlast definitely doesn't take as much money to make as, say, a Star Wars Battlefront 2, it still takes a lot of money. It still takes more money than games used to take. So what does this mean for the future then? Does this mean that they simply aren't going to make games like this anymore? Does it mean that they're going to implement some kind of revenue sharing system like Nintendo has? I don't know, but I can't see things staying the way they are. What I think is going to happen is that we're going to see a further divide happening between the big AAA titles and the indie developers, because I feel like we've been experiencing a good indie development renaissance for the past, I don't even know how many years, for a long time. And I think that like the last game I bought that I really loved was Cuphead, which is a $20 totally new property game by an indie developer. You know, like easily one of the best $20 I ever spent, yet a game like that takes nowhere near the amount of money that a bigger AAA title like a Battlefront or a Resident Evil takes to make. So it's almost as if it's a completely different industry at that point. I think the first big casualty of this whole situation was Silent Hills, Kojima's new Silent Hill game that was supposed to come out for Konami. I'm a huge Silent Hill fan. Konami's break with and complete and utter mistreatment of Hideo Kojima, I think, is where we saw the seeds get planted for where the video game industry is headed now. You know, why invest all those resources into a big title like a Silent Hill or a Metal Gear when you could just make a pachinko machine or a mobile game and make way more money a lot faster with less investment? You know, we all hate Konami. Fuck Konami, alright? But at the end of the day, they're a business, and although it pains me to see them squatting on so many properties that I love, they're just gonna do what they think will make them the most money. But the thing about video games and any entertainment industry really is that they kind of toe this line between being a business and being an art form, and I imagine that a person like Kojima would lean more in terms of video games being an art form, and that's why I'm really interested in seeing how his new game Death Stranding turns out. I really think that Death Stranding is going to be an extremely important release in determining how the history of video games plays out, because it's going to answer the question of whether or not it's financially viable to focus on video games as an art form, or if you just have to do everything you do to make the big budget games financially viable. If Death Stranding winds up being a good game and it does well financially, I think we're all good. But if it flops, especially if it's a good game and it flops financially, I think that any big budget title going forward is going to wind up being a glorified cell phone game. I mean, I don't think video games will ever fully die out in the sense that we'll always have developers who are very passionate about it as an art form. They'll always be making content, they'll always be making good games for us to play, but I don't think these people, if that game flops, will ever be able to wield a budget from a big company again. But anyway, I'm curious about what you think. Are any of you going to buy Battlefront 2 despite the controversy? Are you going to pay for microtransactions? Do you care about microtransactions in games? How do you think the video game industry can mitigate the burden of increasing costs, or do you not even care? Do you just think indie developers should rule the fucking world now at this point? I mean, we might very well be headed there. Anyway, until next time, everybody get fucked.